Okay, so one of the things that came up on the NatHERS Assessor Network Facebook page recently was that you could do, we obviously performance requirement H6P1 and H6P2 are completely distinct from each other. And you can do a whole of home using the NatHERS software, or you can do it using the ABCB whole of home calculator, because they're different performance requirements. You don't need to, do NatHERS with NatHERS, or obviously you can't do an elemental deemed dissatisfied and then use NatHERS for the whole of home, but you understand what I'm getting at. And I actually thought everybody knew that, but obviously not. So with regards to that, I'm assuming that people understand that there's less inputs with the ABCB whole of home calculator versus the NatHERS whole of home calculation methodology. You don't input things like cooking equipment and watts per square metre and all of those types of things, and there's very limited. It's just the ACOP, the AER, and what type of hot water and heater and cooler that it actually is. And it is easier to comply. It's easier to comply using the ABCB calculator than it is using the NatHERS software. And there are circumstances in Victoria that you can actually get it to comply on a reasonable size house with no solar, but you have to use gas, strangely enough. Obviously, we're phasing out gas, so that's not going to happen for too much longer. So based on the limited inputs using the ABCB whole of home calculator, would it be possible to get dispensation under Regulation 233, or would you apply dispensation under Regulation 233 for the whole of home completely if the person or the client was not upgrading any heating unit, any cooling unit, or wasn't replacing or upgrading the hot water system? But let's say they were doing something with the cooker or changing light globes or lighting or something like that. Again, it can be utilised in NatHERS, but it's not in the ABCB whole of home calculator. Would the different methodologies of compliance dictate what you would give dispensation for under Reg 233?
Yeah, it's a good question. I haven't, in practice, come up against it. Mostly I've seen the whole of homes have passed and people have got it up, and I haven't had much requests for 233 specifically for that. I have had it where there's just been a very small addition and they weren't touching anything. So it's the less than 25% and have discretion. But no, it's a good question.
Well, that's a less than 25% thing, which I totally understand that. I could understand giving dispensation with regards to that. But this is, if I'm not actually altering anything that can be input into the ABCB whole of home calculator, but it could be input into the NatHERS software to produce the whole of home report. What I'm getting at is the ABCB calculator is a lot easier to comply with in that regards, and there are, I don't want to say loopholes because it's not really a loophole, it's just you can't input the data. So would there be circumstances that you could apply dispensation under Regulation 233 purely because one methodology was used over another?
Can't say I've thought of it in that exact depth, because I think, for example, if someone was doing let's say they're using the ABCB calculator, they're doing an extension, but they're not touching any of those factors that you've mentioned. Existing hot water services, only a few years old, it's functional. Heating and cooling, there's no significant change. There'd definitely be scope for saying they're not altering that part of the buildings that forms that whole of home calculator. There would arguably be the case too that, I guess you've got to pick your path first, don't you? Whether you're going down NatHERS or the elemental DTS route in the first place. And then you'd really have to put your argument to us, I guess, on the basis of whatever's being used. I'm not sure if it would be enough to tip you across to using one over the other just because of that. But I think there'd be a case in both scenarios for discretion based on the inputs that go into each calculator.
Extending on from that, what about solar? Again, you mentioned a moment ago about maybe the 50-year-old roof is incapable of taking the load of solar, how detrimental does that become when it's part of a performance requirement and demonstrated that this is required for compliance with that performance requirement? Can you say that the house is not suitable for solar and sort of
I think
pass
there
on
would
that?
be cases, because same as you often may not be able to put it on the front of a heritage building as well that's had planning permit, you can't essentially you can repair that roof, but they're not wanting to look at solar on the front of the roof if it's visible. So I think there would be cases where, and often, you know, it might come with a large addition and the new roof would be fine to put that on there, but the new roof might also be, it might have specified a 5 kilowatt system and the new roof can't fit that size system. So there might be some practical considerations that, you know, we've maxed out as large as we can here. But there could also be other considerations of, well, why don't you use a superior hot water system instead of trying to rely on the solar for the whole of home score as well. So there could be some other things that they, just because they don't want to, but they might have to practically look at the other areas that may not be very efficient.
Again, we're coming back to that question, what is reasonable?
Yeah.
All right, so Andrew, I think there's actually a statement in the practice note that answers that exact question. So constraints for installation of PV including overshadowing, complex roof shapes, numerous roof penetrations or structural issues. So it would seem that what's reasonable and what's not, structural issues would form part of that use case for Reg 233 for partial compliance on that one.
Okay.
It also references appliances too, doesn't it? In the where upgrade to appliances and or installation of solar PV would be disproportionate increase to the cost of the renovation. So that's where referencing that some of those appliances may be suitable to remain and not reasonable to ask them to replace a functional system.
So the other issue that we've got with using the ABCB whole of home calculator is when using NatHERS, and it's actually written within the practice note itself, the elemental deemed to satisfy provisions assume that the building fabric achieves thermal performance equivalent to a 7-star NatHERS rating. And if doing whole of home using the ABCB calculator, will underestimate the energy demand for heating and cooling for buildings with a thermal performance less than 7 stars. So if you're using the ABCB whole of home calculator and you've done your rate in the renovated home and you've input all the details, you've got your second energy report, and let's say it rates at 4.5 stars because that's the actual energy rating of the house and the certificate that the client's going to get. Now, you put that detail through the ABCB whole of home calculator, it's actually given a score, let's say, a compliance score on a house that's rating at 4.5 stars, yet the ABCB whole of home calculator is actually thinking that it's a 7-star house. So there's a bit of a disconnect there. And I think that is why there's that other clause within the practice note EEO4 that states you can't actually use the ABCB whole of home calculator if that real true energy rating is less than 4.5 stars. My argument would be, still, wouldn't we be able to put together a performance solution to still use the whole of home calculator regardless of whether that star rating was less than 4.5 stars? Because you shouldn't be able to be penalised by the existing part of the house. If I'm giving dispensation under Reg 233 for H6P1, why can't I give dispensation under Reg 233 for H6P2 as well?
It's a kind of difficult underlying assumption, isn't it?
It's a problem, but it works in Queensland as well because you put all of those 6-star houses through, plus the 1-star credit for the compliant al fresco. All these ABCB whole of home calculators are assuming that it's a 7-star house, but it's actually a 6-star house. It's the exact same premise.
But in Queensland, it's not an exemption to bring it back to 6 stars. It's saying it's 6 stars with credit to bring it to 7 stars. So it's still loosely assuming it's a 7 stars?
Correct, but in the formula that the ABCB whole of home calculator uses, it's still assuming it's 7 stars, not a 6-star house. So you're getting a little bit of a bonus in that regard as well. So in this case, it's a 4-star house, let's say. Can't my performance solution integrate that it's a 4-star house and I don't want to be penalised by the existing part of the house, so I can still use my whole of home calculator even when it's less than 4.5 stars because I'm getting dispensation under Regulation 233. I think there's an argument for that as well. What are your thoughts?
There's an argument to say that you could use Reg 233 where it's available to you. You also look, say, alternatively, what other calculator is there to use? We don't really have any other tools apart from what you have in NatHERS and the whole of home ABCB calculator. So a question I'd have, would you know how to make adjustments to adjust for that assumption? Is that just built into your system? Is there a way that you could potentially calculate out of saying, hey, because it's at 4.5 instead of 7, is there a formula to say what you arguably should adjust?
You could using NatHERS software, but you couldn't using the ABCB calculator. Yeah, and I think that's what it's trying to say. It's saying, hey, the rating's too low. It's just the averages are getting too far apart now. We're going to force you to use NatHERS software in order to get a score of 60 to comply. So obviously you're topping up, you're making the whole of home side of it better because you're trying to still achieve that score of 60, which you don't have to do with the ABCB whole of home calculator. So, but again, back to my argument, if I'm getting dispensation under Reg 233 for a house that's under 7 stars, why can't I get dispensation under Reg 233 for a house under 4.5 stars using the ABCB whole of home calculator? If I'm doing one, why can't I get the other? But you're also sort of agreeing with me on that as well. I think it can work
together. Our Reg 233 isn't limited to only some performance provisions. It does cover all performance requirements.
Yeah, because I know there are some building surveyors out there that are strict on that rule about 4.5 stars, and it's back to, is the practice note a guide, or is it written in law and it has to be done? But
do you have any idea where 4.5 came from?
Matthew?
Sorry, what's 4.5?
The minimum 4.5. Matthew?
In the practice note. But you can't use it unless it's at least 4.5
yeah,
stars.
That's right.
So if I'm reading the room, Brian, you don't use the NatHERS whole of home very often. Is that right?
Waste of time.
Yeah. So I almost exclusively use the NatHERS whole of home. There's only on occasion where I've used the ABCB calculator. To be fair, a lot of the work that I'm doing is using Hero, where it's actually calculating both. I can sort of see them side by side. Occasionally I'll get a sort of like a green tick in the box for both. Not often do I see a green tick in the box for the ABCB calculator, even though I'm populating the whole of home. They're usually both compliant. But I'd have to say, 99% for the whole of home is using the NatHERS. But I think it might just go back to what Andrew was saying a little bit earlier, that, maybe the type of work or the nature of the work that we're working on is a little bit different. And I do have a lot of clients that are actually genuinely interested in achieving sort of, not just the 60, but beyond the minimum score. A lot of them actually sort of happy if they get 80 or 90, or sort of if they can get 100 and they're zero net carbon, then they're sort of like, right? So,
requiring that.
I sort of see the other side. I'm actually able to quantify that and sort of go beyond minimum regulatory compliance, rather than sort of, I can understand that you're trying to not necessarily go the other way, but you're trying to come up with a sort of like the most cost-effective and energy-efficient solution.
That's right.
I appreciate that and understand that. But there are a lot of clients out there that sort of want beyond minimum regulatory compliance for the whole of home. Once they've got to the 7 stars for that, then they're looking at sort of like, oh, okay, what extra over could we do to actually get to, to zero net carbon or zero energy use or all zeros.
the leading, okay, yes, but leading into my next question, then there's also the clause in there that talks about the minimum backstop of 3 kilowatts, which we've mentioned before. So you theoretically, following the practice note EE04 directly, you would never be able to build a renovation extension in Victoria without a minimum of 3 kilowatt solar, unless it's back to those items that we just spoke about a couple of minutes ago. Again, why do I have a backstop of 3 kilowatts? Wouldn't my performance solution be able to have less kilowatts, let's say, if I still comply with the ABCB whole of home calculation, if I'm applying regulation 233 unilaterally across both performance solutions?
Maybe that's the solution to the missing cooking facilities and missing lighting, saying that the 3 is, don't provide us that, but make sure you provide that. I've thrown that out there. I don't know.
So if you've done enough whole of home with using NatHERS, you'll see that it is possible to comply quite easily with, let's say, smaller houses under 3 kilowatts, and that is getting a score of 60.
Yes.
I can see what you're saying, that, hey, it's less than 7 stars, maybe you need more solar in order to comply. But going back to this is a renovation extension, I should have some form of dispensation. Why am I getting full compliance when I don't need to for H6P1? Why do I have to do it for H6P2? Can we all agree that we should be applying regulation 233 on that 3 kilowatt paragraph within the practice note as well?
Where appropriate, because I think the practice note is a guide and doesn't suit every situation. So we're obviously looking at things like we mentioned, like the space on the room, the budget of the build, the structural soundness of whether they can actually do that. Do you have any idea where 3 kilowatt figure has come from to make its way in the practice note?
No, I
outside of anywhere else?
actually don't, but we may be able to find that information out at some point. I think Matthew's got a lead on that.
Yeah. So I do take note too of, like, in general legislation, where I think the wording, I'm pretty sure, is should achieve, not must. So often should in wording in legislation is often taken as very much more a guide as opposed to must be in place. Where a lot different to must as opposed to should. But I mean, there's a fair few things you're weighing up here in terms of 233 on top of that, and on top of many layers in terms of getting compliance. But I personally wouldn't think that 3 kilowatts is gospel, because there's a should clause in the practice note.
I wonder further to that, would anyone install less than 3 kilowatts these days? I mean, let's be honest, the cost of solar has dropped and dropped and dropped, and you got rebates and everything else. 3 is pretty much a minimum. I mean, 5 is generally a minimum these days if you're shopping around. Did they set it so that you just didn't put a ridiculous amount on it to just get it over the line?
Well, the old QDC MP 4.1 required 1 kilowatt of solar. So there were plenty of people installing 1 kilowatt of solar. There are a lot of volume builders out there who have their standard solar system at 2.13 kilowatts, because it's exactly, 4 panels at this amount of watts each. So it does happen, but it's a pointless exercise. Like you say, you may as well have 4, 5, 6 kilowatts. Otherwise, it's really not going to do much of anything anyway. These are just tick the box items for the cheapest possible price that's happening.
So in a lot of my reports, I'll go back and say it needs a 1.5 or 2 minimum, because I need the whole of home specifications incorporated back onto the drawing set for the building permit. By then, they've sized something up more appropriate, and like Andrew's suggested, they're typically larger systems, 3 to 5 kilowatts. So I'll reflect that back, and then the whole of home score sort of exceeds.
Jumps.
Yeah, it jumps. It exceeds the minimum of 60, and
The smallest I've had was 0.3 of a kilowatt system because they hadn't decided on any of the appliances yet. So we had to apply all the defaults. Well, this is what it comes in. You need minimum 0.3. No one's going to put 0.3 on.
But it's a good entry point for solar to be mandatory on all houses. And it's a good way. You've got all the equipment there. You're all ready to go. If you want to put a few more panels on later, that's like you've got all the
That's right.
items there regardless.
But we've already discussed not every roof is suitable, existing roof. We've got situations where narrow blocks overshading. You can't make something mandatory that can't work 100% of the time. If there's
back to the dispensation.
Well, the dispensations also affect the whole of home. So
well, you shouldn't have a dispensation. If you know there are situations that it can't work, you don't make it mandatory.
Back to, is the practice note gospel or is it not? I guess the moral of the story here tonight is everything's up for interpretation again.
I think, as Sean said at the outset, it is a guidance document, right? Yeah. It's not legislated. Is that the term you used?
Yeah, it's not legislated. That's correct.
So the last part of practice note EE04 relates to relocatable homes. Now, again, reading directly from the practice note, an alteration is building work that relates to an existing building, an existing dwelling that is re-erected, moved from one allotment to another, or relocated on the same allotment is considered an alteration to the dwelling exceeding the 50% volume trigger. So this means that the RBS has discretion to allow partial compliance under regulation 233(3). So subclause 3. So the subject to the house not being extended more than 25% of the original floor area, which is based on subclause 6. So we're almost back to exactly where we started, that it's considering that a relocatable house, so an existing house that's relocated somewhere else, needs to be brought up to compliance, but based on all those regulations that we were talking about earlier. So we're back to our, do we have dispensation? Don't we have dispensation? Are we doing a performance solution? So we'd be treating a relocatable house the exact same way that we treat a renovation extension in that case. Sounds about right.
To me, it appears that, you'd have discretion on essentially the whole building in that case because it's considered you're altering more than 50% of it. So it gives a lot of discretion to that existing, which I think is necessary with some of those. If you're relocating a very old house with, your openings are set, you're going to be able to put it on the block one certain way. I think there's just a lot of things that would be very difficult to force it to fully comply.
Yeah, I totally agree with that interpretation. That's pretty much the way it's always been. Yeah, nothing much change in those relocatable home scenarios.
What if you were transferring it to another block but putting it in a worse orientation? Again,
which could happen.
Well, you might.
you're making it worse.
I've got a view that way. I want the house facing that way, but that's south.
It might only fit on a block one way too, but depending on where you're putting it on. So I think that comes into consideration, but it doesn't. Yeah, you still have the discretion, I guess. You still generally probably want the front door facing the front street, don't you? Depending on the block, I guess, and how much flexibility you have in how you want to orient it. But personally, we don't do many relocations as such.
So we've got a random topic for tonight. What are your thoughts on these Bunnings pods? Now, we've all seen it come up in the media, $42,000, $900, whatever, for 9.6 square metre. I don't know whether you can call it a house or whatever they actually are, but how would that work with regards to a building permit? Like, are these permanent dwellings? They're not on wheels, that's for sure. So what are our thoughts on that? Energy reports, permits, how's this all gonna work? I go into Bunnings and I buy a house and stick it in my backyard.
Pretty much. I don't think Bunnings is suggesting anything about them having onus of a building permit or saying you need it. It's like they've got a plumbing aisle, they've got an electrical aisle, but Joe Blow isn't allowed to do subground plumbing and he's not allowed to do electrical. But Bunnings still sells the stuff.
Yeah, I don't think it's Bunnings'. It's not their responsibility to obviously get a building permit. It's the person who buys it. But
Yeah, they're just
are we
providing
getting-
a product. Is that product fit for purpose, though, is the question.
Well, I wonder about the energy reports on these products. Like, it comes with Windows, I'm assuming. What if in my microclimate, in the orientation that I want to put it in, where it's, my property is 1 metre away from boundary fencing and it's 4 metres away from a neighbouring double storey, that's going to be very different from somebody else's block of land that's 20 metres away from the neighbouring double storey that has no shadowing on my house at all. How can it be a one size fits all with all of these potential on-site deviations from one property to another?
Yeah, to obtain approvals is going to be challenging without knowing the intricate details of their whole system, footings, frame, how they're intending on using them. There's some cases that come up of when is a building permit required or not, which is often being tested in courts of generally to be exempt from a building permit, it needs to be very readily movable. I'm not an expert in this area, but I have heard several people quote must be able to be moved within 24 hours to exempt from building permits. But I don't think they're advertising them as exempt from a building permit. So they may be exempt from planning in a lot of cases if it's considered a small second dwelling, but that's not all cases. But a large percentage of sites are exempt under the small second dwelling provisions, which has some boxes you've got to tick. It's got to be less than 60 square metres from a planning perspective. Then you have all these other even requirements of a dedicated access path, which most go to the house. You need a report and consent if you don't comply with that. To be a dwelling as well, it must have a laundry. It also must incorporate your latest livable housing provisions. So trying to do it in this tiny area is quite challenging when you're even looking at circulation and access requirements that are under the livable provisions, let alone the energy rating side of things. So generally to get a building permit for one of these structures, you need a building designer or architect to be able to coordinate these whole things, because you're going to need site-specific footings from a structural perspective, footings or slab, which are always site-specific. It's got to comply with your siding regulations, setbacks from easements, all these things that get factored in that may not be considered in the initial side of things. Plus, an important distinction is you can have a prefab outbuilding it might just be an outbuilding that's just, say, you're using as a home office, you're using it as a pool house, just a building that's ancillary to the dwelling would be considered part of the main dwelling, not a new dwelling. But if it's a completely separate new dwelling, then you have a higher onus on, obviously you have to meet energy requirements and a number of other factors. If it was just a small outbuilding that's in conjunction with the dwelling, there's arguably Reg 233 that comes in if it's less than 25% compared to the existing house, which in many cases would be the case for very small little outbuildings.
I don't think the premise of these is necessarily outbuildings. If you have a look at all the pictures and so on and the advertisements, they're really cost of living crisis and our crisis of lack of housing. There seem to be advertising them all as little houses, tiny houses, more than anything. So one would assume that they're definitely going to need a building permit. I can't exactly work out, as we were discussing before, whether they're on a chassis or a timber subfloor or whether they need to be put on a concrete slab, because that introduces a whole heap of other issues as well if they need to be on a concrete slab in Victoria.
Well, my understanding is it's a completely self-enclosed unit, which would suggest it then has its own floor. So if you were just putting it on a concrete pad, it would still be a suspended floor.
yeah, that would make sense. So it needs to be insulated under the floor. That's really your only option then. Obviously, some batt insulation or some rigid foam, let's say. Now we've all looked at these. We've all looked at small dwellings before. We've all rated small dwellings, and their glass to floor area ratio is not particularly great. They tend to be extremely hard to get to rate, especially in certain climate zones. Looking at some of these pictures, they're all floor to ceiling glazing. They look lovely, no doubt, but I don't think they're going to be triple glazed, that's for sure. And if we can't do insulated concrete slabs, it's going to be tough to get these to comply.
The article that you had up before referred to NatHERS, which is interesting. I mean, I think NatHERS has a minimum, requirement for the zones and the conditioning. Some of these don't look like they could, even have 3 zones. And these are a lot smaller than the tiny homes. The terminology that they're using here is pods or tiny pods. It's almost smaller than a tiny home. And I'm not really too sure that the floor area correction factor, it's just it taps out. It's definitely not going to go down as far as, what was it, 9.6?
Yeah. So,
What is it now?
smallest one
It's
is
down
9.
to 50 metres?
50. And I
Is
think
that
there's
the new update?
discussion about going to 25.
25,
So I think
okay.
it was moved to 25. So
what is that floor area correction? Just to
effectively, it's just designed not to
Bias.
That's correct. It's sort of calibrated at your average house size, and then
This is when you do a NatHERS assessment, the calculation itself.
as you get a larger house, it goes one way. You get a smaller house, it goes the other way. It's just designed to sort of calibrate that a little bit. But
do you get concessions for being smaller at all in a way or not?
I think it hurts.
Because often you're thinking that, like, are we looking at the exact same thing of a 100 square metre house? Is that 7-star the same as a 500 square metre house?
Yeah,
Is
that's
it
what
7
I think the floor area
yeah.
correction factor is designed to partly
Does it-
take that into
yeah.
account. But
Yeah.
we're talking about that Bunnings elsewhere pod as being 9.6 square metres of floor area.
Yeah.
So that's
That's
right.
tiny. It's not gonna work in
I don't
NatHERS.
know.
That can't be one.
That couldn't
can't be a
dwelling.
house.
It's
Yeah,
I
it can't
think
be a
I
class
think
one.
certainly they were
Three zones out of
advertising like
You
I think
join
like
the
I was saying
pods
that
together.
single out built-in. I think they have a huge range. The company that they're paired with have an even bigger range than what they've mentioned. But I think when
Right.
reading that, they talked about that little outbuilding I was talking about before. That's not a dwelling, and then there's another one that's the $42,000 or whatever. The other one that is the actual design to be a dwelling as opposed to just a separate outbuilding.
But that one says 9.6 square metres of floor area for 42,900.
I might have got the
Yeah,
figures wrong, but I think
before
there was a second one
foundations,
in reference.
utilities, or compliance costs. And can push above $80,000. Purpose designed 60 square metre secondary dwellings.
I mean,
At
it's-
60 square metres, we're still pushing the boundaries of what that area correction factor can
Oh,
actually
no, 60,
do, I think.
No, 60 will be fine. It's,
So you said
I mean,
there's-
they are challenging. It's just that glass to
Well,
the
what-
glass to floor area ratio.
Correct, because
and glass to wall as well. It's
I mean, what can you do?
difficult.
Like you generally walk into these via a glazed sliding door.
You need a door.
It has to be 2,100 high by 2,400 or 2,100 wide, let's say. Like, you're not going to have a 1.2 metre high door to scale to
Well,
the
just for
60 square
livability,
metre.
you need to have your minimum entry width.
820 clear now in all the internal doors. Yeah, majority of internal doors, but entry door at 820 as well.
So
Clear width.
this ratio can't, like it can't work with small houses. That's the problem.
maybe that's why it says no publicly available NatHERS rating exists. Because it doesn't have the minimum zones and the floor correction factor won't work.
This has been tried before, like years and years ago. We did calculations all across Australia for a flat pack company like this, and it got impossible in certain climate zones to get them to work. So what I think's happening is I just don't think they're thinking too far down the track. They're literally selling these, and there's every potential that they're not going to be able to actually get a building permit to build them because they haven't thought of every single factor that's the challenges that are going to happen. Agree?
Likely, I'd like to see a test case. I'd like to see someone put their hand up and say, "I'll give it a crack." But
it's an $80,000 gamble that you're taking. Although I'm assuming that you could probably get all the plans first, and you could probably go to a NatHERS assessor. You could probably go to a building surveyor and saying, "Hey, what do you think? What are the complications going to be?" I mean, due diligence, really.
If anybody's watching and they've got a plan set that they can share with us, we'll give it a shot.
That's a good point. Yeah, if somebody's got plans, send it in.
I think we just need to see the plans, and
I like this idea. So obviously, to alleviate this housing crisis that we've got, and what am I reading here? Granny flat can increase property value by 15 to 30%, while a non-compliant structure may reduce value and trigger council enforcement. Yeah, of course.
Which could cost more.
Yeah. Yeah, that
so
would
now
be
you're
unfortunate.
talking granny flat. It's not a house
Yeah.
on its own lot. You're still reliant on the main house as being the primary dwelling. So granny flats, they're allowed to have kitchens?
No,
Laundries?
because you start getting into planning definitions and what is a dwelling. Because generally, once you incorporate a kitchen into it, it potentially meets the definition of a dwelling. So you generally got to have off the top of my head, it's a kitchen sink with cooking facilities, and then a toilet, bathroom, including a shower or bath. Once you tick those boxes, it's potentially a second dwelling on the site. So there used to be, the legislation's changed a bit where it used to be under planning there was dependent persons units that used to be on there, but they had to be demountable buildings. But they've either phased out or they're phasing out now and replaced by this small second dwelling clause. So there was a bit of a transitional period that I think has just finished. They extended it for a bit, but so you could kind of have both operating at a time. But in short, it's led to this small second dwelling. And from a planning definition, essentially bathroom, kitchen makes it a dwelling. But you can have some exemptions because there is a bit of a clause in there that talks about the use of the building. So you could probably arguably have a pool cabana that's not intended to be used as a dwelling, and it might have a bar that has a sink and things like that. That kind of the use comes in a consideration, but it raises a red flag seeing a kitchen in an outbuilding essentially.
So at 9.6 square metres,
You couldn't have
it's a bedroom.
Yeah.
Well, it wouldn't be
couldn't have
NatHERS
Well, that's the other
anyway.
zone that we needed.
No,
We've got the
it'd
kitchen.
be elemental.
We've
Yeah.
got the bathroom. We just needed the
Another
bedroom.
And under the BCA as a dwelling, it's not in the planning definitions, but it's under NCC. You must have a laundry as well. But that's not reason to call it a dwelling or not. It's a required facility in a dwelling.
That can be a Euro laundry though.
Can be. Yep. You got to have room there's no minimum size for essentially the trough and space for the washing machine. So it can be very minimal.
All right, so this might answer some of our questions here. So the Bunnings pods in their base configuration are non-habitable outbuildings. They are shells without foundations, insulation, electrical fit-out, plumbing, kitchen or bathroom. So
So you're getting a cardboard box.
yeah, pretty much. So the buyer must bring the structure to full Class 1A compliance, and the cost of doing so is likely to exceed the cost of the pod itself. Yeah, I could definitely see that. But it's back to that thing about could you even bring it up to NatHERS 7 stars? Like, is it even capable of doing that? Because you've got your window specification is fixed. You can't change that because it's part of the flat pack that you buy. Can't change any of the structure.
Not really
Obviously-
sure why you go down this road and not consider just some of the tiny homes that are out there, which have already addressed a lot of these issues.
Well, are we assuming a tiny home is a Class 1A and it is already complied at 7 stars? Is that, or are you saying the tiny home on wheels and all of that kind of stuff where it doesn't need a
No,
permit?
I think there are tiny homes that have insulation and they've,
Oh, yeah.
you know, like that. I'm not too sure why you go down this pod road.
I think it's just looking like a cheaper alternative, but it might
Maybe
cause
if you're looking for something
complications.
that's non-habitable.
Oh yeah, non-habitable for sure. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but ASPEC
Yeah.
makes steel sheds.
Yeah.
That's not habitable
And cheaper.
and cheaper.
You could just wander in your backyard and have a meeting in it.
So I think the moral of the story is just possibly fraught with disaster. So be careful and engage the appropriate people first before you go and spend $60,000, $70,000, $80,000, not realizing that you're going to have to spend that amount of money again on top to get it to comply if it can comply. But I'm sure there's also, like you said, tiny home
I like the
builders
flat pack idea
out
though.
there.
I mean, maybe a little bit larger flat pack combined with tiny home might work.
Look, it's about prefabrication, I think, these days. You know, the more that's built off-site and then just brought in. But
Oh, there's massive houses
is
like
this
that.
the solution? I don't think so.
No, I to be honest, I would have thought maybe just a sort of tiny home that's assembled off-site in a warehouse, loaded onto the back of the truck and delivered to site. Would
Then-
probably work better.
Then all of these permit conditions are going to have to be looked at during construction or pre-construction so that it meets compliance when it gets to site. So there's more in it than just going to Bunnings and buying a flat pack house and building it in your backyard. A lot more.
But you could probably say that about a caboodle kitchen as well, right?
I love the caboodle kitchens.
Good products.
Yeah, but there's more to it.
There are companies too that have, figured out in this space of prefab, and they'll coordinate everything needed for the client as well. So you're not just selling it to them. They're actually they're customized. They coordinate the building permit, the energy report, the engineer. They coordinate everything, all permits for the owner. That has a lot of value in doing the site specific stuff that is for most owners would be overwhelming trying to coordinate and figure this out themselves. There's just a lot of complexity that comes with it, and also they ensure that they're designed in conjunction with energy raters in the first place, so they're aware of all the regulatory requirements, and the owner has to do almost nothing. I think in some of those cases too, they can leave the owner if they really want to fit out some of them. They can coordinate that, so they have options as well. But yeah, I see that model as much more beneficial to owners than just selling them the shell.
Yeah, I think we're all in agreement on that one.
I've worked on some small homes, but not really so much tiny homes. One of the challenges with the small homes is really the floor. They're sort of usually on like a sled, and it's difficult to get the lax thermal mass in the floor, and it's hard to get the insulation. It's not just doesn't have the benefits of a insulated decoupled slab. So
All right, moving on to my favourite topic, and the one that has the $1,000 bounty attached to it. Sean, my friend, what are your thoughts on verification used in a reference building?
Yeah, I might be answering a question with a couple of questions myself. In practice, I actually can't recall the last one I saw, to be honest. So I see them very, very minimally. I'm very interested in them though, because when it comes to the structure of the NCC and how we're to accept compliance, the reference building is a prescribed verification method. So in general, as building surveyors, we often like seeing a verification because it's, most performance solutions can be a bit open-ended. There's discretion. They may not be very well justified or quantified, depending on, there's thousands of different things you could assess as a performance solution. But we generally like seeing verification because if you tick all those prescribed, essentially the calculation, tick all the boxes, it's relatively, in most cases, low risk, you would say, to accept that because it's generally prepared by someone who's, say, an expert in that field. It's prescribed what they have to do. One example is openings close to the boundary, and a fire engineer does their report based on radiant heat, based on is it 1 metre, is it 2 metres from a bound. They're looking at that, and then they're basing their solution off that. It's prescribed what the rate is that is there for them to use in their report. So from our side, you like seeing verification is, well, it's prescribed. It's very, it's not very open-ended as far as you see it, at least from the outside. So I'm interested to get your thoughts of the issues with it. Obviously, it's been in the BCA for a while and has had some changes to it. It's not something that I have discussed in a huge amount of detail with other building surveyors or engineers. I don't think it's been at least recently, not a major point of discussion recently. But I have heard that it comes up with some pretty generous results compared to what might have been. They might have tried the NatHERS first, it wasn't getting it, so it's a backup to go to this, and suddenly it's all, the building's unchanged essentially, and it's all compliant. But yeah, I'm interested to hear what the downfalls and what your concerns are with the. And I know, Brian, you have some particularly strong views. Mm-hmm. I mean, I can only speak for myself, but I'm not sure if it's a widely known issue amongst, say, many building surveyors, or not that I've seen as a very hot topic to discuss.
Well, I think the first thing that jumps to me is saying it has to comply with elemental before you can even start doing verification. So are they actually complying with all those height of walls and colours and things like that to start the point?
But that was always the issue in NCC 2019 as well. Those under VURB, those 11 items that needed to be complied with as far as elemental. And then one of those items was that it has to be the same. The reference building has to be the same as the elemental deemed to satisfy. You can't, but it was the whole manipulation of the reference building that was the issue. So no, they're not going to comply, but it's under, it's specification 44 now, isn't it?
I believe so.
Yeah, I think it's Spec 44. And there's a whole heap of requirements within Spec 44 that as a building surveyor, you're not going to know one way or another whether those requirements are being complied with or not, because you're not getting the data. You're not receiving any information with regards to what's been put into this modelling. Okay, it's ASHRAE 140, etc., etc. Somebody's done it in Design Builder IES, but you don't actually know what the modelling is. All you're getting is a whole heap of data output on a piece of paper, and it just says, yes, complied. That's really all that's happening. You don't know whether that reference building complies with elemental deemed to satisfy. And this is my worry. I could put anything into that data and say that it complies. It doesn't necessarily mean that it does.
Does it also come back to, I know you mentioned how NatHERS can be manipulated if you're not doing it correctly, which obviously we don't see any background of how you're coming up with those results either. Is this an issue within your industry and raised by your accreditation board? Is it an ongoing issue that they raise? Because also my understanding is it quite complex software that gets used to be able to do the reference building, or is it not that?
Yeah, very much so. So there's a few ASHRAE 140 products, Design Builder, Energy Plus, IES, a few more. I can't think of what they are offhand. Very advanced internationally used software. Very complicated. Tried learning it a few times myself and just, I give up because I haven't got the time to dedicate to it.
So there's only limited energy raters who have, say, the expertise or the training to do it. Is that right?
Well, there's no auditing of any of this, so you wouldn't know whether they were competent or capable of doing it at all or not, and that's another issue. Like, at least with NatHERS, you're getting audited. I'm not going to say all the time, but you do get audited, and there are consequences if your data is not accurate. There are no consequences for Spec 44 at all. No one would know whether
I'm not
you're
sure
doing
we
it
even know
correct
how
or not.
many are being done. It's interesting that you mentioned you haven't received many.
It's not prevalent in Victoria. We've known this. It's highly prevalent in WA. Now, my understanding was that it was going to be less prevalent with NCC 2022. However, it's creeping its way back into the market as well. It's in South Australia, and there are some energy raters trying to promote it in the other states as well. But obviously, we're very heavily dependent or biased on a star rating, so I don't think it's going to make too much traction. But it's there. And that's the issue. You're going to get, and unscrupulous builders will ask for it, and unscrupulous building surveyors will probably accept it. But I also
Potentially.
Yeah. I think to get the counterpoint to this, maybe we could invite somebody on as a guest who does do VURB.
Oh, I'm trying, but I'm not getting anywhere, and that's an issue. And I'm willing to pay for somebody to come in and tell us about it and tell us what they do, but you're not going to get it. That's the issue. Now, push comes to shove. I'll share our NatHERS files. I don't care. I'm happy for anybody to look at them, but no one's going to share any of their VURB files. It's just not going to happen.
Is there a reason it's not audited?
Because
Like
there's
the
no
NatHERS?
governing body. There's no governing body for VURB. It's just like, anyone can do an elemental deemed to satisfy report and hand it to you. And, if you think it's okay, then it gets passed. It's the same with Spec 44, or VURB. You can just do it and hand it in. Like, if you think the person's competent. But the other thing is, any energy rater that's doing Spec 44, their professional indemnity insurance is not covering them to do that. So then the liability, I believe the liability would fall on someone like yourself for accepting that type of report as well. Now, if I also remember correctly, back, what was it? You said it was the ABSA, when we all got together years and years ago for that meeting in, that thing that we did in Melbourne. That ABSA group
ABSA
conference thing. I'm pretty certain that somebody got on stage, an insurance company got on stage and actually said, hey, beware, if you do VURB reports, you're not covered. I'm certain that happened.
Don't remember.
Don't remember? Yeah, okay.
I didn't think VURB
Sorry.
was that old.
Yeah, it's been,
When
this has
did it
been
first
going on
come
for years. Like 2019 was meant to be the end of VURB and it never happened. So it's been going on for...
Yeah, I thought it came in 2016. 2019, they added conditions.
That it couldn't be done with
2022
NatHERS
removed the
software.
conditions.
Okay, so what happened is that in 2019 it moved from NatHERS software to having to be ASHRAE 140 compliant software, which NatHERS isn't, and that was potentially how it was going to be stopped then. And you could not use NatHERS software to do a VURB report. Then I know what was happening was they were going to prior to that even, they were using NatHERS software, but they were doing it as a performance solution, and that's how they were getting around it at that point in time. Then it was the ASHRAE 140 software, which was the second time that it was tried to get some consistency with it to NatHERS, and it still was prevalent at that point. Now, with NCC 2022, with the introduction of Spec 44, it was meant to be near on impossible to comply with Spec 44, hence why VURB was going to be a methodology that just really wouldn't work compared to NatHERS. Except, again, we're back into that issue where unscrupulous energy raters are manipulating the reference build-in.
Potentially.
Potentially.
No, potentially unscrupulous.
I would like to see evidence the other way, but I'm still waiting. And if nobody can audit it, nobody can look at the file, nobody can look at the data, how are we to know otherwise whether it is accurate or it's not? Now, based on the preponderance of evidence from previous years, we can assume that it's not accurate. I think that's fair to say.
Not sure. I don't do VURB, but before, yeah, surprise, surprise. But I mean, there has been a lot of work that I've lost to VURB. I know that. Let's put it that way. Yeah. So, and I'm surprised, but it obviously they managed to deliver a solution to the client that's more cost effective than what it would be under NatHERS. So
your question before, Sean, was in regards to our industry and how can you be sure that we're doing the right thing? So we've insured, that risk of audit, all that sort of thing. You get given a certificate, which is a standard pro forma, which gives all that information. So you're probably sitting in a more comfortable position that an accredited assessor is doing the right thing. If I gave you an elemental report and it was just a summary sheet and said, this is the insulation in the walls, this is the glass, would that be enough, or would you want to see the breakdown of the characteristics of the wall, the glazing calculator, the lighting calculator, all that sort of thing?
Well, it's a bit arguable how they get presented. Majority I'm seeing now are the NatHERS reports. I don't see a huge amount of elemental, to be honest. But
let's go back to NCC 2016 then. What were you accepting then with regards to an elemental deemed to satisfy report?
It was definitely more back then.
Yeah.
10 years is a long time ago.
Yeah.
I still think majority of elemental we were seeing were by energy raters, not necessarily just someone random putting it together. I'd have to revisit, to be honest, but do we need to see your assumptions or do we just need to see the results of the report? There's probably an argument in either way. Do we need to see your workings or not, or does this line up with what's expected by NCC is arguable. Obviously, it's preferable to see any assumptions and wall types and, nominating for this wall type, this insulation's needed. But it's certainly open to interpretation.
I think you'd definitely be asking for the glazing calculator and the lighting calculator.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're spreadsheets. You can provide them. They're easy.
Glazing calculator's always been required,
Yeah, I'm
for
just
sure.
using that as an example.
Yep.
What about JV3s? I mean, that's effectively the same as a VURB for a house. What would you like to see for a JV3 assessment if it came across your desk?
Because if we're looking at, and you're saying like the verification method, obviously. Well, now any verification is obviously still a performance solution. So it does need to start with, any performance solution now needs a performance-based design brief to start with. So you're outlining, the scope, the performance requirements you're looking at, how you're looking at assessing it, including what method are you comparing to DTS, are you using a verification. So obviously in that case, it's the verification out of the 4 options. It doesn't have to be one, obviously, it can be multiple, but it would probably mention expert judgment as well. Some might just mention verification method, but that would be a starting point because you have to get any key stakeholders' acknowledgement at that stage. So it's so that they're not kind of jumping the gun and saying, because it's also a point that if a building surveyor wasn't comfortable with, same as a VURB report, or going, hey, I'm not accepting this, or they might even point out saying, we're comfortable, but you need to cover X, Y, Z and make sure that you can show this to us. But it is a point in the performance solution process that is everyone can have their input at that stage of any key stakeholders. And is always the point that the building surveyor can kind of hold things and say, hey, slow down, or, I'm not going to accept this at all for whatever reason. to get back to your question, so that would be the starting point, must be done before a performance solution's done, and then following the acknowledgement from all key stakeholders, then they prepare the performance solution, which is still then a report that any performance solution then needs to be approved by the RBS as well. So there's a few steps in the process, and same as any other performance solution, you can get some pretty half-assed performance solutions and look at it and go, hey, you're missing a lot of key things. I'm not happy with this. You need to show why this part's suitable. You can name 100 different examples, but and you get them prepared by different people too. So different qualifications, different experience, different understanding of what a performance solution is. So there is a few key points there that give opportunity to review, and we don't accept any performance solution blindly. Essentially, we're not allowed to. And we must approve it and review it accordingly, because we're responsible for that.
But what calculations are you looking for a JV3? Now, I think what Andrew's getting at is there's really no difference between a JV3 and a VURB report, realistically. But I think a JV3 is a bit more transparent, and at least depending on how you present that performance solution, is one's going to be more transparent than the other. And obviously a JV3, there's a lot more of them in Victoria than there are VURB reports. And it also depends on what software you're using, which was mentioned before, because some of them will actually prepare the JV3 for you and the equivalent Part J report. Do you go through the Part J and the JV3 point by point to make sure that the calculations stack up?
It is one that kind of comes back to practically is I really don't see many actual JV3 reports. I'm not, look, there would be some other building surveyors that deal in that area a bit more than we do that would give a better answer than I do. We're generally going through any form of energy report to make sure it is incorporated. I know you guys often do as well in terms of stamping plans of NatHERS. I know often the Part Js and that usually don't come with stamp plans as such, but we will still be going through to make sure that is incorporated, because you'll get cases where wall types may not have allowed for it, and but it's very open to interpretation. How far are we required to, and how far should we go through to make sure is one of those open-ended questions, but not something again that I'm necessarily looking at every day, like the JV3 side of things. It's not necessarily the area we deal in too often.
I think the big difference with JV3 is it's not comparable in the same way to a NatHERS assessment as a VURB is. So where we can see a VURB is hitting 3 stars, 4 stars.
Well, you won't know.
Maybe 5.
You won't know until you do the comparison.
Yeah, you've got to do a comparison to know.
Yeah,
but there is no direct comparison with a J.
that is true.
To calculate a megajoule load.
The way you would, as a building surveyor, the way you'd have to look at a JV3 would be the same way that you'd have to look at a VURB report. The way you analyse it and try and work out whether it was accurate or not. But you don't get the transparency with a VURB report that you do with a JV3. But like you're saying, you can't, unless you've done that back-to-back comparison VURB to NatHERS energy assessment, and also remembering that it has to be the equivalent thereof elemental deemed to satisfy or 7 stars.
First and foremost, yep.
And that's the issue, because it's just simply isn't.
Well, the reason VURB is often done is because you can't get it to comply conveniently with the other tools. So, yeah, you're looking to get out of that box and take a different approach. But, yeah, if you've got a 3 metre high ceiling in Victoria, it's blooming hard to get it to comply with elementals. So how are you going to do that to then get it into VURB? So I suppose I would be saying to a building surveyor, have you seen the elemental data to demonstrate that it complied in the first place, even before anything else happened?
So are you aware what Andrew's getting at with regards to the tables in Part 13, that if there's an X in it, it just simply can't be done?
Can't comply.
Yeah, so it just you can't use that methodology. So it would literally just cross out VURB from being a compliance
If you
method
can't
anyway.
tick all
Yeah.
the boxes.
Yeah. Look, I guess it's good to hear that you're not seeing them. I think that's a positive thing. They haven't made their way into Victoria, clearly, at least for NCC 2022.
Especially for the fact you're doing custom homes more than volume work. You would expect to see more of it.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, you
agree.
probably would, and we do a lot of architectural and higher end stuff, and they often leads to more glazing. But not an issue I've had to address any time recently. I reckon, off the top of my head, the last one I probably saw was one that was 7 or 8 years ago, maybe even longer ago. But there was also some elements of, it was a change of use from a warehouse to a dwelling. It had all these other different layers involved. That it was possibly even longer than that. But I can't actually recall one any more recently than that, which is potentially surprising, I guess. Yeah. But I guess a lot of the architects we work with are often pretty conscientious of getting designs to comply and potentially working with energy raters and with all other consultants in a lot of ways, and doing some high-end projects, because we're even finding from a building surveying perspective that we're given jobs a lot earlier than we used to, because they want to make sure that there's no major issues that are jumping out and things they've missed. And even siting compliance has levels of complexity now that we're reviewing earlier than we would in the past. But just because there's so many extra layers from many perspectives, you find a lot of, particularly architectural high-end jobs, you're seeing it way earlier, and most parties are involved a lot earlier than they traditionally would have been a few years back.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, Sean. It's been enlightening to hear your points of view on everything. Appreciate that.
Thanks for having me.
No worries. Well, that wraps up this episode of The Rating Room. Thanks for joining myself, Matthew, and Andrew and Sean tonight as we uncovered another corner of the NatHERS world. Your thoughts, comments, and questions are important to us, so leave a message on the NatHERS Assessor Network Facebook page or leave a comment below. And until next time, keep rating. You all good with that? Bye.
Yeah. Are we going to keep that in?
Yeah, that's gonna be on after.